Greetings, Earthlings. The time has come to talk about expectation and form in one of my favorite albums of all time, Vektor's Terminal Redux. We get a cool riff near the start of the album, which I'm going to call the main theme. And more than an hour later, it comes back at the very end of the album in a slightly changed form. And this is such a cool, salient moment that it feels like it's always colored how I hear everything leading up to this return on the last track. It's like everything is leaning towards this long-term recapitulation. For another simile, it is like at a certain point in the middle of the last track, we get caught on the edges of a whirlpool, or even better, a black hole, and everything starts accelerating towards this point of resolution. I've argued elsewhere that these long-term thematic returns are relatively common for progressive metal, and that they can help give shape to really long stretches of time and provide goals in listening and add to the metaphor of music as journey. But what I want to do in this video is look a little more closely at the mechanics of building expectation around these long-term returns, because it's not an accident that everything in like the second half of this last track feels like it's building up to this one really intense moment. There is a sense in which this like gravitational pull is inevitable, and it's happening in my brain as opposed to in the music, as if there's any difference there. Because once I knew to expect this extremely satisfying moment, so after I'd listened a few times and kind of learned where in the album it happens, my anticipation will kick in no matter what riffs come before it. It's a kind of like Pavlovian effect where my response to this section moves earlier in time the more familiar I get with this song. That is, I start to expect this really satisfying return earlier in the track, the better I learn all these riffs. This will be true anytime we have a favorite part of a familiar song. If we know there's something fun coming up ahead, we probably can't help interpreting some of what comes before as pointing towards that fun moment. David Huron, in his book about musical expectation, would call this a result of veridical familiarity, or the sense of predictability that comes from hearing a specific piece or recording a lot of times. It's kind of like brute force memorization of how things go. However, I think there are some things in the riffs leading up to this big satisfying return in Recharging the Void that specifically play with these expectations and tease this return for a really long time in a way that ultimately enhances the payoff. This teasing is a result of what Huron calls schematic predictability. So in this case, that means playing off of well-established harmonic expectations, and dynamic predictability, which refers to expectations set by the piece itself, and in this case refers to the way that tempo keeps ramping up and specific rhythmic characteristics of the theme show up little by little leading up to it. It's hard to draw a hard and fast line of where this teasing starts, or where it feels like I start to drift into the edge of the gravitational field of this black hole. I think for me it probably starts roughly 7 minutes earlier at the start of the clean section on this track. So after a few minutes of sick riffs at the beginning of Recharging the Void, the song intensity kind of drops down to one of the calmest points on the whole album and the slowest part of this particular song. And then it feels like everything is just going to build up from here all the way up to the intensity of that return. Illuminate what remains. So things start moving a little faster in the next riff, and things get a little more distorted. And then they get yet a little faster and more distorted again after that. And then there's a tempo modulation, ratcheting the tempo up yet again. So all of that is just like generic building intensity, which I interpret as leading towards the big return because I know that it's coming. The riffs from this point on, though, start teasing bits of this return more specifically. I'll trace two strands of this, one harmonic and one rhythmic. Harmonically, the theme is in F major. I'll get to that in a second. Rhythmically, though, it makes a lot of use of 3-3-2 rhythms, especially in its second half. So that's, dotted, dotted, undotted, filling out a measure of 4-4. And you can stretch that out to be 3-3-3-3-4 rhythms also pretty commonly. I hear the start of teasing this rhythmic pattern in the second guitar part in this last part of the clean section. And the energy keeps picking up in the second guitar part, eventually bringing back the 16th note version of these 3-3-2 rhythms. Before these rhythms take over completely in the next riff, which also ramps the tempo back up to the absolutely exhausting 200 BPM at which we got the original version of the main theme. This riff also starts the harmonic teasing that gives even more of a feeling of hurtling towards some sort of resolution, and makes the moment where the theme returns even more satisfying. The song and the album are, for the most part, as a lot of metal is, in the key of the low open string, which for Vektor is F. In this riff, we get a kind of typical progression cycling from the tonic to 4, which is the predominant, and then we get a harmonized walk-up back to the tonic. The first time through, this walk-up leads back to the tonic because the whole riff repeats. But the thing is, the second time through, it doesn't lead to the tonic. In fact, we've seen the last of the tonic for quite a while, and the rest of the sections will hang out on various versions of predominance and dominance until the theme finally returns. Harmonically, the next riff repeats the walk-up, but instead of resolving, it sits back down to 4 before circling back. This riff also starts to tease the texture of when the theme returns, with this stop time feel that lets the guitar breathe in between hits. Then we get this quick linear transitional section which outlines the dominant with some cool counterpoint, and it really feels like at this point, okay, we've got this huge dominant, it's time to resolve. But psych, the teasing continues with this chord section that goes 3, 4, flat 6, 5, or basically a bunch of versions of predominant to dominant. And then we get a bunch of repetitions of another riff, which repeats that thwarted walk-up going to 4 and ending on 5 thing. And we really repeat this a lot of times, pretty much exactly the same, which feels like it also kind of builds tension. And after 7 times through this short riff, we get an extra half time through, which is kind of a phrase truncation, which we'll get some more phrase length manipulations in a sec, before we land on this riff that really hammers on the 3-3-2 rhythms, now in the 3-3-3-3-4 version that actually shows up in the theme. And again, this is orbiting mostly around 4 and moving to 5 at the end. And then again, there's also a phrase expansion here. So instead of lasting for like 4 chunks or 8 measures, this lasts for 10 measures. And these extra measures tacked on the end draw time out even more. And then this resolves to something that feels a lot like the theme. It has the same rhythmic and melodic contour, but it's in the key of 6 instead of 1. And then after a few times, it dovetails with another time through that 3-3-3-3-4 riff. So we're so close, we're almost there, but it's in the wrong key. And it's kind of mixed with this other riff, and it doesn't quite match what the original version was. And then at the end of that last string of the 3-3-3-3-4 riff, we get a big dominant chord, so C7, that does actually resolve to the clearest version of the theme that we're going to get. So this version uses the first half verbatim from the beginning of the song, and then kind of drifts off on these like major 7th chords in the second half. Here's this whole long segment at the exhausting tempo of the recording. So yeah, let's hope that I use the sense of unlimited power I get from playing these fast gallops for good rather than evil. See ya.